Hands over when you're ready.
Yeah, okay. I think we can get started.
Hi, room. Okay, so we're going to get going in a sec. So I'll hand it over to our hosts for now, and we'll hand it back to you. Go.
Yeah, I don't have too long of an introduction, but hello. My name is Nicholas. I'm one of the TAs for 161 here. That part's not super important. You've probably received a lot of our communication, which is why you all are here. But really today is just a town hall. I know there's a lot of information that's been disseminated about, what's going on with EECS, what's happening with the funding. And today, what we really want to do is just have a space for us to ask questions and, get more perspective and clarity on what has been happening. So yeah, today we have Josh Hug, who is vice chair, is that right, of the EECS department. And he's just going to be sharing a bit about sort of the budgeting issues from the administrative perspective, and then we'll have a time of Q&A. Yeah, take it away.
All right, thanks.
So, question, back of the room, my audio good, or should I use this microphone? Yes, no? You like the microphone. Okay, are you guys happy with the microphone? Folks who are hosting, is it doing echoey bad things? Sounds good. Internet, are you happy with the audio as it is? Okay, good, they're happy. Everyone's happy, the internet's happy, the real world's happy. Okay, hello, so hi everybody. I want to talk a little bit about, before I get into the slides, just my perspective. So I was a graduate student here. I left in 2011, and at the time I left, the program was relatively small compared to now. LNSCS was pretty tiny. So this is the number of graduates. There are 117 LNSCS graduates, 380 total LNS plus EECS. By the time I got back, the program had, when I was as a faculty member, the program had grown dramatically just in that small period of time, and it has continued to grow. This is when I arrived. And so by the time I arrived, there had been instituted a 3.0 GPA cap on 7 classes because the program had gotten so big that it just wasn't working as well as people would like it to. There were a lot of adaptations at that time that hadn't yet been adopted. Classes weren't as scalable as they are now, and things had just moved very quickly. Now, soon after I arrived, I remember the faculty meeting where we discussed raising the GPA cap to a 3.3. Now, I was actually fairly uncomfortable with this idea. It didn't sit well with me. I've always been a very wide open access kind of person. And it's not really a surprise to see that the 3.3 GPA has cost us a lot of grief, though it has controlled the size of the program to some degree. And I'll talk about those numbers. Now I come to you with that context because I want to get you some sense of where I've been coming from thinking about all of this. I understand that the 3.3 GPA cap, I know that there are some students who just say, oh, let's raise it or whatever, but I'm aware that there's a lot of things that have come with scale and with having this GPA cap that are painful. And a lot of it, as much as I feel like we're providing access, in some ways we're really not. Like in the current world order, the thing that we're facing in the world of the 3.3 GPA, I know that if you're a student who comes who's like trained your entire life to go to college, and maybe you've taken a number of different CS classes, maybe you went to high school and took multiple CS classes, the system probably works fairly well for you. But if you're a student with no prior background, or who comes from a background where you're even facing like existential issues, where you're facing rent or even food insecurity, where you're working jobs on the side, it is really, really, really hard to make it work at Berkeley today, as far as stretched out as we are. So I have a lot of conflicted feelings about access, and I want to put that context out because I want you to know that I'm thinking about it and that it's a big deal to me. So with that said, let's jump into this presentation and get a sense of what's up. So I'm going to do this in 3 parts. First, I'm just going to talk about the costs of our high enrollment and why I think that our scale is problematic. Obviously, not having money is a problem, but that's just the root fungible cause, this money issue. But there are many other things that come with these high enrollments. That we'll talk about what how the actual budgeting works, and then possible plans moving forward, and I will be happy to take questions and feedback. Now feel free to interrupt me as I go with questions, like in the room by raising hands or on the internet, and I'll be happy to pause. I'm happy to do a dialogue as I go. So here is a slide that I believe John DeNero put together actually. whenever we were trying to talk to the faculty in the last 2 years, planning around how to deal with the crisis, the long heralded crisis, by the way, trying to deal with it finally now that it's arrived. So our scale causes us, our current program is in crisis for 2 reasons. One of them is the declaration process itself, and the other is everything that comes with our scale. So on the declaration side, as you know, there's this 3.3 minimum GPA, and it is stressful. Even if you are somebody who eventually clears the bar, it's still stressful to have to think about for a lot of students. Maybe for some students who come in really, really, really well prepared, they're never that worried about it, but quite a lot of students express anxiety, mental health concerns, because they're dealing with this 3.3 GPA cap. Now for students who don't make it, who are denied, it's disappointing because you have to change your life plan. You came to Berkeley to do CS, you didn't make it, you pick another major, and that's disappointing, obviously. And it's also discouraging. Having prior computing experience, we've seen this time and time again in 61A and 61B data, especially, that's the part I know at least. Having prior computing experience really has a strong correlation with how well you do. And this has any number of issues. It turns away students effectively who are trying to discover the major. And then if we look at demographic diversity, for example, if we look just at underrepresented minorities, I'll show some statistics for LNSCS versus other majors, is quite poor. By contrast, EECS, which does direct admissions, has a much higher rate where we're able to take in African American, Latinx especially, students into the program through direct admissions, and we've seen much more success in reaching that large component of a population who should have access to what our major provides. Now in terms of our growth, as you saw, we saw the numbers just in the table, but if we look at it in a chart, it's been just amazing, dramatic, and just, I mean, almost beautiful. I mean, I've really enjoyed teaching large classes. It's an interesting experience. It provides social mobility, but not for everybody. And there's a lot of downsides that we see at the top. I would say that many things are not working well, even though, yes, we have grown. There are a lot of trade-offs here. It's painful. Now, even though we have this 3.0 and then 3.3 GPA cap, the major still has continued to grow a lot. And if we wanted to pare down even more with the GPA cap, that's not really on the table at all, by the way, in case anybody's wondering, but I think that all of these issues would be much worse than they are today. Now, this coming semester, this is just LNSCS, by the way, it is possible they're going to exceed 1,000 degrees this spring. I mean, this is maybe slightly shy of that, just because of the continued increase in interest in CS, and also the pandemic, I believe, temporarily effectively suspended the GPA cap for a year. I don't know how much of an effect that was. I haven't done the analysis, but that's the sense I have. Now, in terms of scale, what does it mean to be a student at Berkeley? Well, it means being in lots of really, really big classes. And there's some good things about that, right? I mean, groups like CS Mentors and all the interesting tutoring done by HKN and other groups are possible because of our scale. We really enrich ourselves with our scale. Our students are able to contribute to the classes, but it does mean that for the most part, you're only taking classes that are gigantic. We have 24 course offerings a year with 400 plus students, and we just have an extremely high student to faculty ratio. Now, as a result of all of that, beyond just the classroom experience, it means that trying to get letters of recommendation or trying to get involved with research is just a lot harder, and I'll give some numbers on that, than it would be if you were a student at, say, MIT or Stanford or UW or UIUC or CMU. We can't do differentiated instruction as easily as we could, perhaps, in a smaller scale, and it's just hard to get to know your professors, right? We have issues with impacted courses. In spring 2021, there were issues where some seniors were almost not able to graduate, and we had a lot of scrambling in the last couple of years, trying to get enough courses out there so people can graduate. And in the survey that some of the academic student employees or organizers put together, there were a lot of students who complained like, well, I can get into classes, but I can't get into the ones I want. And there's some classes, like say 160, which is just really, really hard to scale. We have these chronic teaching staff deficits, and that is really pushing us to action really soon, and I'll have lots of details on that later. So this, in a sense, is a summary of many of the painful things that we've dealt with as a result of our growing enrollments. And so let's dig into a few specific issues more carefully. So this is a current picture, or actually it's about a year ahead of date now, that we put together to try and understand where our students come from and where they go. So there's the EECS path, which is 450 or so people graduating per year. And of those, 250 of them came in directly as freshmen, 130 of them came in directly as junior transfers from a community college, and then 90 were intra-college transfers from, say, mechanical engineering or bioengineering. I'm gonna look in this chat real quick. Right, okay, yes, okay. And so that's the EECS branch. And then on the LNS side, I have what I called the trial by fire path, where a bunch of students arrive. There's some students who come in LNS CS intended. There's some students who discover CS when they're here. They had no interest in CS before, but they take CS 10 and they get excited or whatever, and then they continue along the path. And then we have a number of students who were intended, but they picked some other major because they thought it would help them with getting into Berkeley, right? Like they picked applied math or physics or whatever, and their goal was to do CS. And then we also have some junior transfers. Now among those, our rough guess is maybe 35%, but it's very hard to say what the exact numbers are, get culled by the GPA cap, either because the stress makes them lose interest before they get through 70, or they take 70 and don't do well enough and don't make an appeal. So that's the world as it is now, and this data is drawn from these three sources. Okay. So this is the way things are on this day, and we end up with quite a lot of graduates as a result. Now, some of the downsides, as I mentioned, if we look at underrepresented minorities is the word, the phrasing that is used on the official Berkeley page, we look at majors, and we see that among all majors at Berkeley, I have the link here, LNS-CS has the second lowest participation by these minoritized students at 4%. EECS is also relatively low. Though interestingly, I have on the right that if we look at freshmen who state an intent to register at Berkeley over the course of time, then in the last couple of years that EECS has done a much better job recruiting URM students, and they have been coming to Berkeley in much larger numbers. So we're starting to get a population that better reflects the diversity of our state and direct admissions on EECS side. So I expect that this number will climb. This one is harder to do because EECS has a direct admissions pathway and they have outreach, and I could talk more about this later or at least point you to someone else who can. If we look at gender diversity, the GitHub page here that Berkeley provides, it gives female degree recipients. And so we see that here, LNS is one of the lower majors, but actually EECS is even lower. So in this point, the gender diversity skews in LNS-CS's favor, though I note here that EECS has also improved. But it is the case that, yes, LNS computer science is a better pathway for non-male students than EECS. Okay, so those are some background pieces of information on who is making it. Now, if we think also about what it is like to be a student here and what a high student to faculty ratio means, and if we compare it to our peer institutions, we see something pretty striking. So this is a table that I got from John Canny that he put together. And here we see the number of CS-oriented Bachelor of Science, this is the number of CS-oriented degrees per year. So this also actually, I think I might have messed up John's table. So I'm just gonna say CS degrees. So these are all the folks who are trying to do CS. And so at MIT, there's around 683 of them. At Berkeley, there's 1,100 per year. And this, I believe, was a rough estimate that subtracts out people who are EE focused. Here we have the number of FTE, and this is an acronym that if you're on faculty, you will one day learn. It means full-time employment, and it's the number of full-time faculty. So it's in a rough, why this jargon? Well, sometimes you have someone who's half in EECS and half in physics, so you're 0.5 or whatever. And so if we look at our student to faculty ratio, we're graduating 18 students in CS per every faculty member, which is well in excess of these peer institutions. And so as a result, that means that if you wanted to get involved in research, or you just want to talk to your professor about baseball or whatever, like you're competing with many more people than you would at other peer institutions. And this is for those students who are interested in building these faculty relationships and really taking advantage of what makes a place like Berkeley special, which is working with world-class researchers on cutting-edge problems is much harder. Now, for many students, this isn't an issue, right? For lots of students, it's, I want to go to Berkeley, I want to participate in the student culture, I want to take the classes, I want the job skills. Maybe this isn't such a big deal for you, but in aggregate, it makes it quite hard for a lot of students who want to have these deeper experiences with research. All right, yes, thank you. And then we also have, of course, the other portion of the student experience, like not just the classes you take in research, but all the support you need to get advising help, or get into courses, or get hired as a TA, that sort of thing. So we have a lot of staff in the department who help out. Here's the page. Here's our lovely staff who I've gotten to know quite well. Hello, thank you, all of you. I'll scroll past you at light speed. So all of these folks are there to help, and their budget has remained essentially flat. It hasn't grown much, even as the number of students that they're serving is about 4x what it was a decade ago. So the staff are overworked, it's harder for students to find support, and it makes for an environment where everything is stretched thin, like everything is really stretched thin. So these are the things that we're paying, not just it's hard to get into courses or the courses I want. Everyone is stressed out. There's faculty stress, staff stress, student stress, and this is what we're dealing with. So one of the big questions that was brought to me was, well, why don't we have more money? Why can't we hire more staff or more faculty or more TAs? And so I am not an admin faculty. I'm like a step below that. So I don't know the budget as well as someone like our chair, who is around perhaps on Zoom or in real life, I'm not sure. Oh, I think he was coming later. And so I'm going to give you the budget picture as I understand it. It's a little incomplete, but I want to give you what I know. Okay? So as I mentioned, we have these issues that we're facing. And in the coming year, the situation's even a bit more dire. Okay? Now, why is that? Well, let me give you just some numbers. So one of the most important constraints we face in terms of just scaling the classes, not thinking about, for example, poor Cindy Connors having to deal with all the things that she does. If we just think about, I need TAs to be able to handle office hours, answer student questions, et cetera. That part of our budget, which is huge, is our temporary academic staff, or TAS. So these are our GSIs, our tutors, and our Unit 18 lecturers. I don't want them to be temporary, but that's just the title they give. And so the recent cost is in the range of $10 to $11-ish million a year to hire all of these temporary academic staff. And as a rough sense, this is the table. If those of you who have been head TAs, this is what some of the most common categories of temporary academic staff look like. So for example, a 20-hour EECS GSI has a total cost of the department of $18,450, which is an hourly rate from the department's perspective of $54.26. This includes, of course, tuition remission, and so this is the department-facing view. That for every hour of help we hire from a 20-hour EECS GSI, that's $54.26 that the department has to pay. Yeah, please.
Is this data public?
I don't know if it's public, but it's public now, so yeah. Yeah.
It's not really accurate, so.
Yeah. Tell me more, John.
Well, the EECS versus non-EECS GSI is not, there's no actual difference to the cost.
There is on our budget.
I know, because we manipulate the faculty into hiring more EECS GSIs.
Right, okay. So there's there's an abstraction layer here. This is the faculty-facing view, right?
Yeah, I mean, this is public in the sense that it's in the contract for the UAW about, but, you know, it's never been presented, I think, in this particular format, but this is public information.
Right.
The line about 8-hour GSIs only applies to undergraduates. We don't hire graduate students at below 10 hours a week, which is what my comment says over there in the corner that Josh ignored.
Okay, yeah, there you go. I sure did, but I didn't see that comment before. When did you put it there? All right. So to get a sense of what a particular course looks like, and those of you who have, again, been head TAs maybe know this sort of picture, but I put here 61B because that's the course I had handy when I put this slide together. This is a year out of date, so the numbers won't match the previous slide, but I guess you can figure out how much the cost of living increased. or sorry, what the pay raise it was at least. So in this class, I had 1,565 students, which was 6,620 student credit hours. That is, each student took 4 hours of class, because that's how many hours the class is. And for that class, I had a budget of $528,809. That was broken out among these different staff. I'm not going to read them all off. But this led to a cost of around $80 a student credit hour is what it costs to run just in TAS staff. Now, this is a pretty lean course, 61B. It's hard to run a course much cheaper than this, and many courses are a little more expensive. The lab, for example, in 61B is just being on the internet, so that's not that expensive. Now, this doesn't include other staff salaries, like all of the support staff in EECS who help support the students. This doesn't include the cost of facilities. It doesn't include software licenses. It doesn't include my salary, which is a totally separate thing. And so it's an incomplete picture, but it is the proximal thing that I'm concerning myself with here. Whenever we say we don't have money to hire TAs, this is where that money is going. Now, the average course in our department is more like $100 to $120 a student credit hour. It's a little fuzzy, actually. I've been trying to get this really straight, so I've just provided a range. If anybody, I can update this later if you'd like, but that's about what I understand. Yes, Nick?
Do we know what the figure is for, say, economics or the other large departments?
So other large departments like econ, et cetera, I've actually seen those numbers now, Nick, and I believe that ours are not substantially cheaper, interestingly.
So how are they handling the deficit?
That is a great question. I want to understand how they handle the deficit. So I'll explain why the deficit exists. Every department faces it, and this is a great question, Nick. I know part of the answer, and I'll cover what I do know. So if we think in terms of graduating seniors, they take around maybe 48 student credit hours from EECS, and so they're around $5,000 in TAS funds. So if you're graduating 1,400 students a year, that's $7 million in TAS funds total. And again, this does not include all of the support staff and everything else. This is literally just the TAs and the tutors and the readers that support them. Now, if we want to support non-majors, which we do, then the total budget ends up being more like $10,500,000 because we have a lot of students who are not EECS majors taking our courses. So this is the money angle. And so then where does all this money come from? How does the department get $10,500,000? So it is not that we have a mine where we collect, golden coins or bitcoins or whatever, but instead the money comes from two different places. One of them is from the EVCP, which is the Executive Vice Chancellor and Provost's office. And that's the money that I think when you're a student, and me until a month ago or so, figured, okay, there's just money that comes from some office, and obviously it just scales with the number of students, and then you'll be fine more or less. Now, while it does scale with our enrollments, it doesn't cover our entire budget. If you're curious about the mechanism, this office gives money to each college, and that money increases with enrollments to that college. So the College of Engineering gets around $54-ish per student credit hour, which is not worse than other colleges. And then the COE gives that money to the departments within COE, and they use that for TAS, temporary academic staff. Yeah.
Just for scale, this is on the order of $1,000 per student per semester out of your $7,000 tuition. So,
Well, tuition is $7,000, right?
Yep.
And you're paying $500-ish each per student credit hour, right?
The average is about 15 units.
Yes.
Yeah.
So 15 times 50.
750 or so?
So 750 to 1,000 max.
Oh, per year, right.
Per year or
Per semester.
Per
Out of
semester.
Your 7,000
per semester?
So basically, a little over 10% of the money you're giving to the university ends up in the TAS budget.
Let me think about that. Sorry. So $7,000 by 15 units. That's like $500, right?
If it's 750 for one semester, it's about 1,500 for the entire year.
Yeah, and it's 15,000 for tuition, so it is about roughly 10%. Roughly
Oh, I see,
10%
yes.
of your tuition gets turned into TAS funding.
Yeah, that's about right.
Right. Okay. So, interesting point, Nick. Yes. So then, what that means for the department is that this office is providing $54 for student credit hour compared to a $100 cost. And I should note that other departments and other colleges also have that same feature, that the purple number is lower than the gold number for them, sometimes even lower. So every department has to make up for this difference, and you could do it in a bunch of different ways. And this is the part where, this is David Wagner territory. But one of those big pieces is faculty salary savings. So if I go on leave and the university is not paying me because I'm off, I don't know, running a startup or something, then my salary is returned to the department, and the department can then use this to cover the gap. There's also a fixed allocation, which was based on 2011 enrollments. I got an email right before this meeting from Anant Sahai letting me know that. I don't know much more about it. There's other programs, for example, the MEng program that the EECS department has. There's also concurrent enrollment, where students pay to take classes as non-Berkeley students. And there's summer instruction, where students take classes in the summer, and in those semesters, we make more money per student for whatever reason. We also sometimes have philanthropic grants, and that's been part of how we've closed the gap in the past. And then there's also been us going to the university or to the College of Engineering and saying, we would like some more money because we need money in order to stay above water. And my sense, at least as a non-chair, is that we've been the person going door to door saying, I just need like $5 more just this year. And that patience, I think, is lowering. Now, crucially, these bottom revenue sources, they don't scale with the number of faculty or students, though this top one, the faculty salary savings, does. Yeah. Sorry, it doesn't scale with students, it scales only with the number of faculty. Thank you, John. I misspoke. This one scales with the number of faculty, these scale with nothing, really. I mean, you can maybe argue that MEng scales with the faculty in some indirect way, but no. So here's a plot. In a universe where we're teaching 600-ish total student credit hours, our gap between these two would be about $1.4 million, and so faculty salary savings would cover a significant fraction, perhaps all of that gap. In a world like we live in today, where we are at 100,000, oh wow, my total student credit hours, x-axis is wrong. I changed out the colors, sorry everybody. Here, we're gonna do a little live edit and I'll fix it later. Yuck, 30,000. How did I do this to myself? I wanted to make the purple and gold lines match, and I ruined my x-axis. Okay. Okay, this is the true axis. Well, yes. The problem was I'd already used blue for number of students, so I had to pick a new color for the EVCP, and it had to be red-green colorblind aware, so I couldn't use this different color. And purple's kind of fun, because it's like the royalty color. It's given to us from some place. Anyway, so this axis should be 100,000. And so the gap is widened, basically. And so basically you think of there's a fixed offset that we're able to take advantage of that is concurrent enrollment, it's not quite fixed, faculty salary savings and so forth. And those relatively fixed offsets can't keep up with this gap anymore. Okay? Now I should note, this is just a crude model. 30,000 is the student credit hours that we were teaching in 2010 to 2011. But back in those days, costs per class are actually higher, so you shouldn't think about this as a historical record. It's just saying if you take the numbers from today and you adjust the total student credit hours, then you see a gap that widens or shrinks. Okay? So in some sense, I think of this as the high order bit for why we run into trouble. All right. Yeah, please, John.
This seems like the key slide. Can I make 2 comments about it?
Yeah, please, John. This is the key slide. Yeah. Do you want a microphone?
Yeah, there's 2 mics here.
The other one's low on batteries.
No. There's yet another mic.
Oh, yeah, okay.
But, I mean, because.
Well, there's 2 mics, because of the internet mic and the world mic.
yeah.
Okay.
I don't know what's happening.
This
Am I
is
taking
the one
that?
the internet can hear.
Am I giving you this? Okay.
Questions later.
Bellow.
Well, I didn't know this information was public, but now it is. So I think the picture here tells me 2 things. One, when there's kind of an imbalance between where the faculty are on campus and where the students are, then you get this effect. Because central campus tries to kind of distribute funds evenly, but then those funds are supplemented by the units that actually teach the courses. But if all the students show up in one place, then that unit doesn't really have the capacity to cover a larger and larger gap. So, you know, you could think of this as just like, oh, something's being grossly mismanaged, and that's totally plausible. But I think this is also kind of a reflection of a mismatch between student interests versus where the faculty are around campus doing all kinds of things like research and stuff like that. So that's kind of part of the story. Yeah, you know, another part of the story that's kind of interesting is that when units hire grad students to be GSIs, those units were already planning to fund those grad students somehow. And so campus distributes these funds to run courses, expecting those funds to pay grad students who are gonna, like, it's an obligation anyway. But this is how the obligation gets fulfilled, is through this expenditure of funds, which, yeah, like it was said, came out of your tuition. The story with undergraduates is a little bit different. Like, there was a plan for the university to fund tuition for some of the undergrads through the need-based program, but for everybody else, they weren't really planning to pay for the tuition. So the fact that EECS does things differently than everybody else, well, except for data science, is by hiring lots of undergrads, which is the only way we can run at this scale, because we kind of ran out of grad students, is that all of a sudden these funds, which are, you know, for running courses, but we're supposed to kind of get the dual benefit of running courses and helping fund PhD students, is now being used for a different purpose. So I think those are kind of two macro effects that are happening here that are kind of behind this picture that help me understand how on earth we got to the point where, like, we can't just pay to run the courses that students want to take. Something like that.
Thank you, John. I sent this figure to, or this numbers to a lot of people to make sure it was okay. So hopefully they all still agree it's okay. I didn't go rogue. All right, so then next year, we are running into the issue that our budget, I've heard from David Wagner, should be less than in previous years. I don't know the order of magnitude here. A big piece of it is that our continued demands for one-time allocations, they may not be met. Going to campus and COE and saying, hey, our gap is really big, we need money. Because they know we need money, and we've been saying, they've been hoping, I think, this is my own conjecture, that we would reduce our enrollment so that we would not keep doing this. And at the same time, the allocation we're getting remains roughly flat. Now, it's also the case that demand for student credit hours from us may still be growing. For example, we have this roughly 1,000 majors graduating this year versus 802 last year. There's, of course, data science. And so we're kind of pinned to a wall a little bit here. So what we need, and this is the part where we need your input and where the things get dicey, is we need plans for the class that's coming in fall 2023 and beyond, which is the earliest date we can change things significantly. And then we also need a plan for the class that's here or will be coming in the fall. So here's the plan for the near future, or for the distant future. And this is similar to the plan you may have already seen from before, but it's been revised with some input from LNS. But I should note that this plan I'm going to describe, it has not yet been reviewed. So this is, like, even the faculty haven't really talked about this. This is very prototypical, but I just wanted to be open about what's being discussed right now. So in terms of the plans for this admission scheme, if you haven't seen this before, when we're trying to figure out what ought to replace the 3.3 GPA, but also reduce the class size to some degree, and I'm just taking that as an assumption. So if we assume that we want to reduce the class size, what do we want to do? So let's suppose you wanted to shrink the class size to a number that seems to work well, which is maybe the class size of 2016, like 800-ish students. If you wanted to do it with the GPA cap only, your GPA cap, I worked out the numbers once and it's really high, like a 3.8 or 3.9, and it's the apocalypse, and I don't want that. So what are the actual principles we want for a new admission scheme? These are principles that the faculty, I was on a committee that discussed them, and the entire faculty voted on them about 1.5 years ago. So it was, we want to get to sustainable teaching operations in 4 years. We have to do that. We want a healthy and effective admissions mechanism. And to that end, what does it need to do? 1, it should allow some degree of control over the number of majors that's better than we have now because we're too big. 2, we don't want competition for admissions when you're here at Berkeley, which is central to stress and culture issues. And that was an enormous debate about how this proposal should be done. We want to avoid demographic biases that are structural. So for example, did you do computer science before you came to Berkeley? And we also really want people who discover CS to continue to do so when they come to Berkeley. Because I have many TAs who've discovered CS when they're here. Now all of these are in some ways at cross purposes, of course, along with the implicit goal of providing access to everybody and social mobility. So I'm not saying that there's some solution that maximizes all these criteria. There are trade-offs. We also want to be able to closely mentor and develop future leaders. I've known many students who have slipped through the cracks and have never gotten to go do really serious research because, well, they were just in giant classes. So we want to do better on that. And we want to offer some type of scalable path into computing for everybody, because we really do believe that the tools that you learn in computer science are incredibly powerful and also really good for finding a job. Now that includes, for example, data science, or wouldn't it be great and if we have some number of courses that are scalable and could take everybody, even if not everyone is a major. So here is the plan that I mentioned earlier, has not been reviewed by students, the faculty of our department, or the university. It is tentative. This is not written in stone, but I'm part of a committee thinking about this, and we're working with the LNS Executive Committee, who didn't like our plan last year, and AEP, which is another committee. You can Google this acronym later if you'd like, and we're trying to revise admissions. So one possible plan is below, and these numbers are placeholders, and they're on the conservative end of what I think everyone's comfortable supporting, but maybe it could be bigger. So in this universe, we would go from 1,300 or so students to 800. This is the same as last year, the plan we were discussing before, and those plans would be, or those slots would be allocated in the following manner. So here we're assuming EECS is the same size, and then LNSCS, well, there'd be 270 slots for freshman applicants. 200 of them will go directly into LNSCS. So I'm finishing high school, I apply to LNSCS instead of EECS because I feel a greater kinship with LNS, because I still want to maybe double major in politics or something. Or maybe I just don't want to be rejected from Berkeley if I don't get into the major. And then the other 70 spots would be admitted through some kind of junior transfer-like application process after you come to Berkeley. So these are students who came in undeclared, or history, or physics, or whatever else. And this process would only be open to students who did not apply to CS. So if you apply to LNSCS and you get back a letter that says, sorry, you can't do CS, you would have a final note that this is it. You can never do CS at Berkeley, but at least you have clarity. If you're somebody for whom CS is more important than being at Berkeley, choose from among your other options. This path, this holistic review process, it is for discoverers only, and discoverer is somebody who didn't apply to CS intentionally. Now the number needs to be smaller here because we need people to be honest, because it would be silly if we had a path that was where if you're dishonest, you have a better chance of getting in. The incentives and the numbers are aligned so that people have an incentive to say the correct thing and not try to follow this narrower path. And then we have 50 slots for transfers from community colleges, and I will talk about the criteria for these two holistic review processes shortly. Here's a picture. So in this future, we would have some over 5,000 people apply to CS intended. 350 of them would be admitted and pre-approved for CS. History suggests 200 of them will actually show up at Berkeley, and probably all of them will declare CS as a crude model. We would also have 650 or so of these people who get admitted to Berkeley. They said, I want to do CS. We say, yes, you can come to Berkeley, but not CS. Some unknown fraction of them come to Berkeley and say, well, I'll do something else. I'll do some other major because I really want to go to Berkeley because it's my dream school. Bummer, I can't do CS, but hey, there's scalable pathways to computing for all, just not CS. None of them will declare CS. Then, for people who come in who are not CS intended, they would apply in maybe their sophomore year. This is subject to discussion, but they would take some intro CS classes, and then some of them would apply. I don't know how many people will apply, but I'm just taking some wild ass guesses here, and I'm assuming that, and then I'm saying we'll accept 70 of them or so. And then in terms of community college transfer applicants, some of them will apply, CS intended, and for those who are approved, they can declare CS. Okay? So that's this one plan that we may do. Yeah?
Why does it say that the number of CS intended applicants is likely to increase under this proposal?
So this is the historical number. The question, sorry, was why will this number increase? Why will more people apply to CS? Right now, a number of people apply to something other than CS because they believe it will improve their admissions chances. In this universe, now this is the path that has got the highest chance of actually getting into CS. And so people will hopefully be more honest. Yeah?
There's another question in chat.
Yes, chat. So why would EECS remain the same? So right now, honestly, the reason is because we can only change so many things at once. I think in the future, we would want to revisit EECS admissions as well, but even just getting the single thing through has been an enormous drain on effort, and in a good way.
We've got a couple more questions.
Yes.
So first, so with students, so would the 70 students that get the Discoverers way to CS be similar to class admissions, or how would that work? Is the first one an after?
Right. So let me talk about that question, and then I'll take the other one. Do you mind? Yeah. So what would be the criteria for Discoverers and community college transfers? This is a rough sketch of what that would look like. So it would be having a high technical GPA, but not just your CS courses. There's a holistic review, by the way. There's not like you do these things. So the nice thing about the current process is it's very clear. This is now a holistic process. So it's a little harder to tell whether or not you'll be accepted as you go. We'll also want to be looking for strength and math courses in addition to this high technical GPA overall, because our major is fairly mathematical. We will need to, we'll make sure you've completed some set of lower div CS courses, obviously. This is more oriented towards community college, but obviously the students who are taking in as at Berkeley Discoverers, we also want them to take lower div CS courses. We'll look at course load, and this is something that happens already in junior transfer admissions. So somebody who's only taking one course a semester or whatever is a less appealing applicant than somebody who is taking a heavier load overall. I mean, modulo, of course, these other issues. So we'll also be looking at activities. So if you are doing activities related to math, science, and engineering, that helps. Are you doing some, are you participating in activities where you are a leader? We'll have essays, and these essays are, presumably we'll just use the same we're using from the junior transfer essays, but perhaps something slightly different. And we'll also consider, of course, personal circumstances. So if you've been able to succeed in the face of adversity, so let's say you don't have a heavy course load, but there's a good reason for it, we'll of course take that into account. Does that help?
Cool. So,
Yeah. What was the other question?
Yeah. The second question is, how is this supposed to differ from the one that Ellen asked you back there?
The difference is that this path is now based on what you do at Berkeley versus what you did in high school. That was their primary concern. Are there more questions?
Hell yeah.
Good for now.
Yeah. Yes. Go ahead.
It seems like this plan wouldn't exactly help significantly with lower division number of students, or the number of students in lower division, like first year classes. Would the plan therefore be kind of like move funding from like upper division courses towards the lower division courses?
So the question was, doesn't this still keep lower division courses quite large? Perhaps. It is possible this is a universe where we have a set of much larger lower division courses than upper division. And that's part of the vision for a scalable, access to scalable, or scalable path to computing for everybody. But we could also imagine restricting those courses to some degree. And I'll say a little more about that in a moment. Yeah, Nick.
Doesn't this mean that the pipeline won't start draining for 3+ years? So we've got 3 more years of crisis at least?
It does mean that, yes, you're right. So there is a pipeline still. And so regardless, we have a large number of declared majors who will not graduate for 2 years. So we've definitely got some pain in the short term. Yes.
When it comes to the ratio between that directly admitted and pre-approved and LFS, I know like these numbers are like somewhat like big now, but
Yeah.
will this ratio roughly be equivalent to this, or will we expect that?
I think 70-30, 75-25 is probably about the ratio we expect, yeah. There's some incentive design things we can talk about sometime if you want. Yeah.
I've got an anonymous. I think it was meant to be anonymous. I'm not actually
Sure. Bring it anonymously.
So I know. So I can't confirm this information myself, but it seems like they say other UCs do like some sort of cap, so just cap the major as a whole, and then there's an additional lottery system to get in.
Right, so the question is, what about a lottery? So San Diego, for example, does do a lottery. That's their holistic process. But the lottery, they've just canceled their lottery. It's no longer a lottery. I don't know the full details, but I know San Diego's just eliminated it. I'd say the closest school I know of that does this is UW. All right, oh yeah.
Does this mean that basically nothing is free for anyone who got into Berkeley before the year this takes place?
Right, so what about people who are already here was the question. So this is all fall 2023. But we do need to talk about the issue that several people have raised now. What about giant lower divs? Aren't we in trouble in the near term? So we also have this question about what is happening fall 2022 earlier. Oops, there we go. So let's talk about you. You're already here. Or those of you who are almost here. You're probably not in the room yet, but any class entering fall 2022s here? Really on top of things? No. But I wouldn't be surprised. There might be one on Zoom. Okay, so I will say this. So for people who are already here, who are coming, who've already applied to Berkeley, and they're gonna say they're registering in 6 weeks, we need to do as much as we can to support people with our limited budget. So my sense is that we can definitely do the following. We can definitely support people who are declared majors. So if you're a major, and one of the concerns on the advertisement for this event was, will you be able to graduate? This is a very top priority for us, to offer sufficient courses to allow graduation. And if you came to Berkeley and you said, I wanted to do LNS, I'm CS intended, and you're admitted, say you're coming in next fall. If you said I'm LNS CS intended, I think we have a really, really strong, in my opinion, obligation to support you when you come here. So these are things I think we can definitely support. And then we also want to support the following as much as possible. So I still would like us to have as much as possible a path for discoverers. So this is somebody at Berkeley. Like if you're here in this room and you've only taken 61A and B, I would really, really, really like it if you have a good shot at being able to also get into 70 and declare CS. But it is possible that courses will be small enough that you might have trouble getting in. More on that in a moment. I would also really like to even have a path for students who game the system a little, because, I mean, you were just playing the admissions game. This is my own opinion. I think it would be nice to support people who applied to physics because they thought they could get in, if we can. Yeah.
Yeah, on that note, there's a question in the chat, which is, in an effort to keep LNS and EECS admissions level of competition the same, would it be possible for a student to list a preference between the two, but be considered for both?
So the question was for this earlier, right here.
Yeah.
Could they list preference, be considered for both? So I think in the future it would make sense to make it the same admissions process, because it's kind of weird to just like cast your lot with one arbitrary process versus another. That would be the hope in the distant future. And the goal is also, if we work out the numbers, the admissions rates are pretty similar. Like this number is also tuned to match EECS and LNS.
Yeah, cool. We got another question now. Is this change to the declaration proposal still a necessity if we were to get the necessary funding increases to operate?
I'll take that question at the very end, which is, do we have to do this if we suddenly have much more money? So I'll talk about that.
All right.
So one more thing then. So I will say that it is very likely, though, that we're going to need to reduce enrollments. This is what I've heard from David Wagner. And some possibilities are that upper division CS courses might be restricted to, for example, majors and minors only. That's one thing that could happen. Another is that some lower division courses, instead of taking literally everybody, as they always have, it's possible that maybe 61A, B, 70, et cetera, might not be able to take every student. And so in that future, maybe we'd give priority for EECS and students who applied as LNS CS intended, and give priority for other majors that require the course, and then the rest of the seats, it's just up to the vicissitudes of the enrollment system, perhaps. Other suggestions are certainly welcome here. Yeah, so this is the near future, and the thing that is most important. So if you had two slides that were really, really important for you, there was the purple-orange line slide, or purple-gold line slide, and this one. Thoughts on this slide, actually, because this is something I'm particularly curious about. Yeah.
Is this like the upper division is like way prioritized for majors? Is that a common thing
Great question. Does anybody know if other majors, I mean, I think there's majors that just don't let in non-majors, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, like English, I seem to recall. They won't let you in.
I don't remember the details.
Yeah.
There are some departments that restrict their upper division courses to declare majors.
Yeah, because I have a friend who, or not a friend, a former student who transferred out of Berkeley because he couldn't get into upper div English
I
classes.
think a lot of house classes are like that.
Yeah,
I see a lot of math classes like that as well.
yeah.
Priority is very common though.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The one question I have is, does the enrollment system even include the intended status? So could we even actually prioritize for EECS and intended LMS?
It is plausible. I've talked to Cindy about it. You would create permission codes for classes.
Oh, so it ends up being a permission code.
That's one way to
that
do it.
has to go to, ooh.
Oh, that sounds like.
It could be painful. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead, Michael.
All right, one second. Cool. So a couple more things from Zoom. Would DS or other departments be able to buy priority seats for classes that aren't required but are options for students that they would like to take? Could someone sort of, could another department in a sense help fund our courses for their own students?
Priority for EECS is easy.
That's an interesting question. Could other departments buy seats for their majors? This is starting to go down a dark road, but, right. It's happened?
189, yeah. There's
Oh, 189
data
did that.
science, 189.
Oh, right. Okay. It's been done.
And then here's another comment. Let's see. Let me try to read this other comment. Oh, there's now a few coming in. Unlikely in the near term, but might a fully automated.
So I couldn't quite hear you. Can we? Yeah.
Might a fully automated light version of 6.1a plus small reading group styles for folks who are interested in CS but only casually be an option? So
Right.
some
Yeah.
other, what are the options for, computing that are not computer science necessarily?
I think that's an interesting thought. Right. So good. I'll take that as a suggestion, something we could do. It reminds me of something that Nick has suggested before. Go ahead, Nick.
One annoyance that's going to be a problem is that the enrollment system overall doesn't allow you to say EECS or LNS. It's giving slots for EECS or slots for LNS CS once they're declared. So the upper division, you're still going to have a big hassle if you want to restrict it to majors only with allocating anyway, because you can't say this slot is EECS or LNS as far as I can tell in the enrollment system.
All right. I'll tell Cindy. She might quit.
No, there's, yeah.
Back of the room.
Has there been any thought to like reduce like requirements, like allowing 54 instead of 16A and B?
So yes, there's a number of such discussions going on at the moment. Not this specific one, but yeah. Tweaking requirements is on the agenda for our discussions in the next 2 weeks. Did you have another one, Michael?
Yeah, so will students be able to still take classes that they want, or will they essentially have the option of just whatever is available to graduate?
I believe it is already the case that students can't necessarily get into the classes they want. I suspect this problem will be worse in the near future. That's my guess. Yeah.
Do you sort of like a timeline on like when meetings between LMS and COE are going to be happening, and sort of like whether these propositions are going to be like going forward or leaving the executive and sort of about it?
So with regards to the fall 2023 plan, this is something that will be happening over the next, let's see, what's kind of the timeline? We're supposed to talk to there's a meeting, first big meeting, this AEPE is actually who you're thinking of, is next Wednesday. And there's this meeting happening right now with you guys. And then for enrollments next year, David, do you have any insight into when these sorts of decisions get made? For like how much, for restrictions on classes?
I imagine class enrollment, decisions for class enrollment this fall are going to be made in the next few weeks, probably.
Right.
Phase 1 starts April 18th.
Yeah. So So you'll know before phase one. Yeah. Go ahead.
Are these meetings open to the public?
This is a good question. Are they open to the public? I don't think this is a meetings thing. I think this is a people figuring out how much money there is thing. But yeah, I mean.
Yeah, AEP meetings are closed meetings.
Right. Yeah, they wouldn't even let me go.
There are student representatives at those meetings.
Yeah.
Because they're part of the, what's your
ASUC?
ASUC.
Yeah. Yeah, I went to one by accident once I wasn't supposed to go to, and they're like, you have to go now.
Yeah. There's
Yeah.
a couple of questions in Zoom
Oh,
chat
good.
too. There's one about if anything would change to DSP priorities or priority status like regents that are campus level things.
Right, so presumably we need to continue to honor existing priorities that are set in stone. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm gonna take this question in the room and I'll go back to you, Michael.
This is kind of like Justin's question, but if they're not open access, is there any way of like some sort of transcript just so you can know about the conversations that are set, like affecting our teachers?
Transcript, probably not, just because I don't think they're created. But I'm happy to, insofar as I don't draw fire, report out, right? So I think it'd be nice for me to keep an open line of communication as vice chair about how things are going. Yeah.
Yeah, I said, Josh will do a good job of that because he's good at that kind of thing. But if you don't talk to your ASUC representative who's on this committee and like ask them to take notes and tell them what you think, then they will represent you without knowing how to represent you. So I think that's the whole point of representative government is that you have to check in with people who are doing it. Otherwise, it just has to make this happen.
Who is that person? Any idea?
I don't know. I'll look up.
Yeah, okay. John will find out. Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, so one more. So for those of us who are discoverers declaring this semester, would operative enrollment in any way affect people who currently didn't intend to major CS, if you're sort of in the pipeline right now?
I would say, is there an issue? I would say no, there is not. Oh, I see some names appearing. Oh, cool. Oh, good. All right. That was cool. 2 faculty at the same time. So if you're if you declare this semester, no. If you're declared, you're the same as old school declarants, we'll call them. OSD. Okay. So if you get in, you're good. Now, I do think, though, that if you're someone who has not yet taken CS 70, then you're subject to the size of CS 70, which will hopefully be big enough to take everybody. But.
So does that mean that we should advise people who are delaying their declaration?
Oh, interesting question. So if someone is delaying declaration, should they declare as soon as possible? What are they waiting on, though?
From what I understand, declaring later allows you to get certain access to other classes because there are certain classes which have priority to like non-declared.
I see.
Also, if you're waiting to take CS 88 or CS 10 because you don't have as much incoming experience,
Yeah.
aren't they also?
Yeah.
Right, but I feel like those time scale for someone who hasn't taken 10 yet so far out that it's
Like,
you can't do anything.
I know there are a few upper division math courses which I couldn't take if I had declared because the priority was non-declared or math.
Right. Well, I don't think there's any move to limit who can declare if they've passed the requirements. That's not on the agenda. The only thing that you could change courses on at this point would be what classes you're taking, but that's pretty difficult at this point in the semester. And it may not be a moot issue anyway. Other questions? Yes.
So just going back to the discoverers declaring, I assume this would be like during fall of next year, like we'd be subject to site.
You're talking about this path?
Specifically we had in the Q&A section earlier, where it's like discoverers.
Oh, here, yes.
Yeah, so specifically for that, does that mean that people who applied LMSCS but aren't declared yet, would they still get like priority for 70 in the event for fall of 2022, or is this like not known yet?
So what would the priority look like for CS 70 for people who are 2/3 of the way there? Great question. Don't know. Yeah. Michael, online relay questions.
Cool. Yeah. So two more for online. I think these are both good questions. So some people outside EECS have suggested that we should limit the number of EECS courses a major can take. I assume they mean one of our majors. the concern is that some majors are taking well over the required courses. Is this being considered?
Right. Should we cap the number of EECS courses non-majors can take? This is mechanistic.
Or the number of EECS courses that EECS,
Oh,
and
the
I
EECS can
presume
take.
CS majors as well can take.
Right, and EECS by here, I'll do CS, EECS. There you go. You know what I'm saying. Should we cap the number? This is difficult to do. I know that it's come up in discussion, but David, do you remember, or John, what's been said on this?
All I can tell you is it's been discussed like basically everything. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I just get in there. I love it. You can put it back in the pocket.
Sounds good. It's dignified, John.
Look, we're not just trying to maximize the number of degrees that we grant. We also want to have the people who are in those degree programs have a great experience. So there's a trade-off here. There are people who, if limited to just taking the courses that they need in order to graduate, and wouldn't be able to take any other courses, would have some very tough decisions to make and might not even think that Berkeley's the place for them because they want to study like a large variety of things. So yeah, so there's a tricky trade-off here that I think we're still kind of mulling over. Everything's on the table, but my temptation personally is to let people in and then give them kind of a range of options once they're there.
I will also say that the option of capping the number of courses in a major once you pass a certain number of units is something which is not possible given a billion-dollar enrollment system. You can take that. But we do have a couple more questions. I don't know which order we should go between room and online.
Is there a room question, just for variety? Yeah.
Like, functionally, what would be the difference for applying like LSS?
Slides.
So in the fall 2023 plan, how do you decide LNSCS versus EECS? They're very close. Yeah. I kind of feel like you would apply LNSCS though, because then you can still get into Berkeley. I'm nervous about this, that's like the dominant factor. But that's an unclear thing. And I think in the future, a unified admissions process makes sense. So you don't have to pick. Or like your choice doesn't matter. It just determines your college, not your odds or anything. So I think the mechanism should be the same for both. Yeah.
Second question.
Online question. Yeah.
In what ways is this problem affected by the recent lawsuit that would require UC Berkeley to reduce enrollment? And yeah, they're not sure if we have any idea how that might affect our own situation.
David, have you heard anything about this? Does it affect us in any way?
So this issue is completely unconnected. It is not coming out of that lawsuit. This is based on the challenges that have been facing us that long predate that lawsuit. So it's just a happenstance of timing that you're hearing about these issues and about that lawsuit around the same time. But the coincidence in timing doesn't mean that the lawsuit's driving this.
Also, I'd be willing to bet that it would have very little effect on our enrollment. Just instead of some university would use it as an excuse to cut our TA budget more.
Michael, do you have another online question?
Yeah, let's see. There's a lot. Okay, let's see. There's a question if anyone knows anything about CS 161 in the fall, that has come up a few times. What will happen there? And,
Like, will it be offered?
Yeah.
David, do you know if 161 will be offered in the fall?
We're still working out the schedule.
Okay. Sounds like a maybe to me.
There's an attempt.
Yeah.
That's all we know.
Got it. Okay.
All right, I think we are now caught up.
Did you want to ask any of, there was a set of questions that you guys had collected from students beforehand, right?
Yeah, so we also have the form that we sent out a while ago. I don't think we'll get to all of them, and at this point,
Sure.
we do want to respect everyone's time.
Yeah.
I think one of the things someone in the room brought up was, if there were suddenly more money that appeared, is this still a plan that we'd have to implement? And maybe more generally, like, is there some sort of future that exists possibly, where we don't have to, just at the end of the day, cut enrollment.
Right, so this is a really interesting question. So if we had more money, I mean, it's true that our measures would not have to be as harsh. Now, it's an interesting question that if we had an extra $15 million a year or whatever, so that we were just totally flush with cash, and because right now, I should note, we have a gap and we're just barely making it. We're turning away students with GPA cap. We're disparately affecting people who don't have access to the resources that others do. TAs are stressed out, staff are stressed out. So we have actually a long way to go to be sustainable, and we can't even handle our current scale, to be clear. Now let's say we had all the money, like 15 million more a year. I'm just making up that number, but that would probably do. So if you have that money, you could do the experiment and send it our way and we'll do it, and we'll see what happens. What would that world look like? Even there, it becomes complicated. I mean, I think that I don't know that there's a consensus on the faculty that we should all teach our classes at enormous scales. Like I know, for example, Scott, who taught networking for so long, like he was really just getting a little bummed out by the feeling of the giant networking class, that he was teaching this big class. He's an amazing lecturer, maybe one of the very best of us. And he's maybe the best, I don't know. I love watching him talk. And it just somehow, like, people weren't showing up. It wasn't feeling good. So I don't know that there's actually a faculty consensus that we should be at the absolute maximum possible scale where we're graduating 2,000 students a year or whatever. I think that it's hard to say. But I do think there are a lot of people, like, I don't know, I'll throw out some names. Like, I'm pretty into that idea. I know Joey Gonzalez, we've talked about this. And I can imagine having a major where you have a software engineering track that's infinitely scalable, and then we have another track that is more oriented towards people who might want to do research or something. But yeah, hard to say, but it is conjectural.
Well, with more funding, the future would look quite different than what we were expecting.
With more funding, things would be better. Unclear if it would be infinite. Go ahead, Nick.
Just as somebody who has been a proponent of it, that we either go full on, let everybody in, or Thanos snap, that this mid thing that we've been muddling through for the past couple of years is a disaster. That it would take will by the department for a fair number, but not all faculty, to be able to do scalability. But it would also take money. But for reference, the money is about the same amount as a 5 to 7 football coach's salary. Part of the reason I'm burned out is the realization that at the university level, education is not a priority. That, for example, okay, 2020 was an extreme year, but roughly $50 million university-wide, university funding for TAS budgets, $25 million for the athletic department.
Where is the money going? Like, we've heard that 10% of the funding for a student goes to like TAS budget.
And also note that the tuition is only part of the funding for the university. That, for example, the CS department, if you look at it at the university level, is a huge profit center because of how the funding model works. That our buildings we paid for out of donations. So the infrastructure cost is more maintenance, not debt. The university gets huge overhead plus salary on all our plus tuition on all our grad students paid for by research grants. So if you look at the funding side from the university standpoint, we're a huge
So where does it go is a good question. I mean, I don't know where to learn.
I can give it.
Yeah, go ahead, John.
Or do you want
Yeah.
to? Because here's also.
Oh yeah, okay. Sorry, Mike, I didn't mean to cut you off.
It was more fun to lean over.
You can lean over there. I'll give you this too.
Oh, double. You know, budgets are complex. I think you look at one view, which is just like, look at the numbers of how much is spent on athletics or the stadium or something like that. And it feels like this university doesn't,
$100 million a year, $10
and it just,
million a year for the university side.
yeah, thanks. So, and it looks like, gosh, this university doesn't care about undergraduate education at all. And then, I've sat in many administrative meetings. And the people who are making decisions, nowadays at least, I don't know about the distant past, I certainly don't know about that stadium, care a lot about undergraduate education. And spend like inordinate amounts of time and sleepless nights trying to figure out how to solve these problems. So, all the way up through this campus's administration, I don't see ill will or kind of lack of caring about student experience. I see quite the opposite. Now, in terms of like making rational decisions to actually improve the student experience, well, it turns out that's a hard problem. I wouldn't give this university an A+, but I also look at like how other organizations run, where I've like lived inside some private organizations like Google and stuff like that. They screw it up pretty often too. So I'm actually not clear that we're like, could we make better decisions? Absolutely. Are we doing it like way worse than expectation? At least with the current administration, I would say no. But there are an awful lot of constraints on the budgeting problem that they try to solve. And so that's sort of my take, having seen both the numbers, which are appalling, and the meetings, which are like quite uplifting. It's like, how come we can't just solve all these problems by like redirecting the money away from athletics? Well, actually it turns out it's even more expensive to shut down the football program than it is to keep running it, things like that. So, I think it's just tricky to make that happen.
Foreclose on the stadium? That would give us $20 million a year.
Yeah, so I will just add to, add to what John said really quickly. The overall finances for the university are fairly public and well understood, but it is a 30-year-long change in how the state also funds the university. And so if you want to break down the roughly $3 billion in budget, there's some really good Cal Matters and NPR articles that kind of delve into this. But it's a much more complicated problem because what to actually cut is a really hard decision.
Okay, so I think at this point, we can keep talking. I'm happy to stick around for a little bit, but let's call this the end of the official meeting so people can go on with their day, but I'm happy to keep chatting. And I'm also happy to continue these discussions. And as you mentioned, like, it would be nice to have more transparency and understand this more, so I'll work towards that so I can help answer those questions in the future.
I guess one thing I'd like to know if you have.
Yeah, okay, so we're gonna let the room kind of go into the next steady state, so if you're heading out, go for it, and we'll keep going in about 30 seconds.
Oh yeah, I guess one thing, I think we'd like to know is like what, I think there was an alumnus and then some students on the forum as well that are like, what can I do? Because, they don't really want to just sit there twiddling their thumbs. Like, what are some active things that we can actually do as an alumnus or as current or even a prospective student?
All right, I'm taking the floor back. I wonder if, John or David, if you have insight into this question. Another popular one with students is, what can we do to be helpful as an alumnus or current student?
I will also add that someone asked in the chat, is it okay if we were to hold degrees hostage until we got graduation? Tongue-in-cheek, but it's the same thing.
Well, I mean, obviously participating in this process and giving us guidance is good. So as we're coming up with plans, if they're terrible, tell us. Oh, we have a class coming also, by the way, in a minute. So what I'm going to do actually, so that the class that's after us can take over, I'll call it here, but I'm happy to take additional questions in chat. Okay, thank you, everybody. I forgot you. Just like, for example, their faculty meetings does help.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, I was kind of curious because I feel like I could definitely see the, at least like, because as a student, I definitely see like there's a large class number, but like other like non-CS EECS, it's like shorter. So I was just kind of curious if it was representative.
But I am curious to know how other departments make up their gap. Like that's something I'm very curious now that I've learned about this whole thing. So yeah.
Yeah, that's one thing I've always been curious about. But then I also hear like some other departments, they complain the same thing. So I wonder if it's reflective of the university as a whole.
Hey Nick, thanks for coming. Yeah.
So
Cool.
yeah.
Any other questions or thoughts?
I kind of wanted to have this question answered while there were other professors too in the room.
Yeah.
But I've asked you before, so I don't know. Regarding you know, the grading curves on classes and TA pressure.
Like would people change the way they would grade?
Like if the grading curves are nicer, would the TAs be able to handle more students because there's less pressure on them?
Because why? Because I missed
That's
that.
a good question. That's
Sorry,
a really good
If
question.
the grading curves were nicer, would what?
If grading curves were nicer, will TAs have less pressure on them and therefore be able to take more students?
Oh, I see what you're saying. Right. So if grades were higher, I mean, it depends on how much. So basically the point is students' desire to get points stems from wanting to get higher letter grades, which means that they have higher demands on TAs. Like imagine all classes were pass, no pass, would there be less load? Probably.
We've seen this in the lower divs versus the upper divs where the GPA cap is 0.2 higher.
Yeah. Right. And I think Michael just next to me had noted that obviously in the GPA cap, there you really care about your grades. So you're gonna max out your needs, your desire to do well at the point.
Hear me? Because I will also say from teaching 4 different classes that have 4 different grading schemes, it fairly intrinsic in the wide variety of students that get into Berkeley, because that was how they got admitted. And so I don't think my courses that are graded a little bit more leniently have necessarily less TA work. The stress and pressure and workload come in different forms though, but it's not necessarily lower.
But if grade standards were, well, I think at this point, the grade standards when they got reset a few years ago relaxed to a point that faculty were like comfortable with. But I think that if you wanted to have professors give even higher grades, I think that even if the department gave people the leeway to do so, I don't think they would necessarily.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You got it.
I'm a little sad about that answer, although it's right. I can't do anything about it, but
yeah.
My other
what's
question.
The sad part of it?
What's the sad part about it?
Yeah.
That the reality that you know, regardless of I guess Michael said, regardless of how difficult the classes are, TAs are still going to get bombarded or something.
Yeah, I mean, the way that I put it though is not necessarily like, I think you can think about it in a sad format. I think you can also say that it is also because students want to learn and want to get as many things correct as possible. And grade is a motivating factor of that, but computer science has a really unique facet that other disciplines don't have, which is the way that we use auto graders gives you such instantaneous feedback. And even not an auto grader, right? Like the Java compiler yells at you the second you have a syntax error. And you don't get that when you're necessarily doing a problem set in another course, at least, depending on the tool. And this does change, I think, how students approach programming and computer science courses. And so some of it's great though, because it means that students really do want to learn, but it still means they're stressful.
Yeah, that's fair. Actually, to add on to that, because I'm actually taking CS 70 and 186 right now, and I definitely could see that, like, especially like where 70 office hours, they're more crowded, even if it's like the same amount of TAs, but like 186, I don't see people as stressed about as grades because they're already declared and it's upper divs. And to kind of add on to that point, I'm actually, as someone who kind of considers myself as a discoverer, because I came in with the intention of mathematics, which
Mhm.
is something I used to be passionate about. I definitely think that like having like more stricter criteria would actually like lowering the numbers would actually improve the quality of 16A, 16B, and 70. Because having taken those courses and as a transfer, I took those courses in community college. I definitely am kind of like, in a way, like I kind of wish it was better in quality because I felt like if it was better in quality, I would have gotten more out of 16A. But like at the same time, I feel like this would be unpopular opinion because I feel like other discoverers might disagree. But for me, I feel like if we had like in a way like better like TA to student ratios, that like we would have more access to that resources.
I'm hoping we can get there. I mean, I think it would be nice. There's definitely been a sense that it would be nicer to have more dollars per student credit hour. That even in this time of crisis, that's been on our chair, David Wagner's agenda, to make that work somehow. But it's just a hard trade-off because every dollar if you increase that ratio, you're reducing the number of majors. Hitesh, you'd asked about intra-college change of majors or double majors. That's not on the immediate agenda, so probably not. Right. I mean, yeah, there's a list of things that we're discussing in the next week, me and David Wagner and some other people, and it's not on that list. So I anticipate no. All right, I should probably run because I need to go stop being a bad father. Go hang out with my kids.
Well, see you tomorrow.
All right, see you tomorrow.
Thank you for the information. We appreciate it.
You got it. Yeah, I
Yeah.
hope it was helpful. All right, bye. Thanks for the feedback.